Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week, we are talking all about recovery from old emotional trauma. Now, are you struggling to let go and move on from past trauma? So this could be physical or emotional abuse that you've experienced in your childhood or early years. You know that what happened was not right. It shouldn't have happened. But now as an adult, you are finding it really hard to find a level of acceptance or inner peace with the past situation or the people who were involved. And so you're constantly reliving the trauma and re-experiencing the pain, hurt, anger, frustration, confusion, resentment, all those horrible emotions that are involved. Well, in this teaching, we'll be explaining why you feel so stuck with this trauma, even now, and what you can do to finally heal and move on. Okay, David, so how common is it for your clients to feel completely stuck with past trauma like this?
This is a massive issue for a lot of my clients, and it's something that they kind of have to live with for the most of their lives, and it really makes them emotionally unbalanced, and it definitely involves the inner child. So again, in this video, we're going to be talking a lot about the inner child, because if that unfairness and injustice happened as in your childhood, it's very difficult for that part of the mind to find a resolution.
And I can't think of one person who would say, I want to stay stuck. I want to keep reliving this. The intention is to let go and move on because they know that is the only way forward. But there's something going on in their thinking or their mindset that is keeping them stuck. What is it?
Well, there's a couple of important things I've got to say before we get into the kind of we dig down. Is that one trauma is not better or worse than another one. So this is what a lot of clients say to me. Oh, David, I'm sure you've heard this a lot and mine isn't that bad. Don't say that to yourself. If it's something that really is creating red light feelings, I call them red light feelings. You may call them anxiety, trauma, injustice. If whatever's creating that very intense red light feelings, don't compare yourself with someone else and say that's better or worse. And you're absolutely right. Somebody wouldn't come and find me out and speak to me if they didn't move on, but they haven't got the techniques to move on because they're looking at it from an adult point of view, where for most of my clients, this happened in their childhood, and it's their child mind that we call the inner child can't find a resolution to the unfairness and the injustice.
So are you saying, David, that our adult mind, the mature part of our psyche, wants to move on and is very willing to move on, but that other part of our mind, our psyche, our inner child, doesn't want to move on, doesn't know how to move on?
Yes, and this is why I like the analogy of the inner child. So although the mature part of your mind will know this is something that happened, I don't know, 15, 25, 30, and even 40 or 50 years ago, and you know that you got through it, there's a part of your mind that's clinging on to it. And this is what I would call the inner child. Now, you may want to call it your ego or your subconscious mind, or some of my clients call it the devil that sits on the shoulder. But if this injustice and unfairness happened to you, this abuse happened to you when you were a child, it was almost like that childlike mind couldn't deal with it. It went up over their pay grade, as if you like, and didn't know how to address it. And so what they do, they kind of shut it down. They try and hide it away, or they try and avoid it, or they put it to one side, or they start placing blame and they get stuck. And that part of the mind then creates what we call the carousel of despair, going round and around and around. And although I understand you don't wake up every morning and think about an abuse that happened 25, 30 years ago, But what it does, it forms a kind of a foundation for your view on your current life and your current thinking. And so this is why you have to do the work. You have to go back and try and resolve the unresolvable.
And I know, David, in a lot of our other teachings, you mentioned this idea of that part of our mind being so shocked, so overwhelmed, so confused, so not having the knowledge or insight as to what's going on when we're young and we experience these traumatic events, that part of our mind becomes kind of frozen and stuck in time. And it, and it never matures, it never grows as we grow physically into adulthood. So do we need to deal with and find and deal with that small child within us?
Yes, that's the description I'd like everyone to think about. So it's not that you have stayed as immature. You've grown up and you're getting on with your life. But there's part of your mind. I like what the Taoists call it. It's like the kernel in the middle of a nut holding on tightly. Because what that part of your mind did, the inner child, I call it, is they built up a protection or a safety barrier, and they kind of locking themselves as in a prison, because what happened to them is something that beyond their reasoning or their childlike mind could deal with. It took them completely out of what they expected. And that could be, as you said in the introduction, it could be a physical, could be sexual, it could be something that happened, like the family splits up, the father or the mother walks out, somebody dies, something happens, constantly moving school and house. Again, don't compare yourself with others. If it's something that's causing you that imbalance, then it's something important to you. And hopefully today we're going to show you how to go down and try and deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And that's such an important point, because no one would have expected us to be able to manage, process, understand what was happening when it happened to us at a very young age, unless we had an adult in our life who sat down and explained to us in a way that we would understand what was going on. So we drew false conclusions, and often those false conclusions are blaming ourselves.
Well, you've hit on a very important point there that I wanted to emphasize. Is for a lot of my clients, the people that should have been there to guide them and to help them may be the people that's creating the abuse. And so this paints the child into a corner. The child has nowhere to go. And so invariably the child then blames themselves. Because when you're a child, you're very much into the blame game, look to someone else. And if it's your carer in whatever way, your parent, your grandparent, your teacher, that's creating the abuse and the unfairness and the injustice, whatever it is for you, then it's almost like that's the person that you'd be looking for guidance. And that's the person that's creating the imbalance. And so the child mind has nowhere to go than to say what I call the vow, the VOW. This is very important. The child will say something along the lines of, there must be something wrong with me. And when you have that right at the core, right at the first foundation, it's almost like the first domino effect. Then from that, there's something wrong with me, or there's something missing in me, or I've got something wrong here. Then the next layer then comes the three layers. I'm not good enough. I can't cope. I'm unworthy. I'm unlovable. And then from that, then the dominoes start to build up. And this is the problem. You have to unpick that, because I'll say again, it's not that you wake up every morning and think about this injustice and unfairness. But after saying that, to some of my clients do wake up every morning and view the world through that lens. And you have to go back and you have to educate your inner child in a different way to look at what happened to them, because I don't want to see themselves as the victim. I don't want to see them as there's something wrong with them. I want to see them as victorious. I want to see them as a warrior. I want to show them that actually they got through that situation. And all we've got to work on now is their mindset, their view, because we can't go back and change what happened. Doesn't matter how much you talk about it, think about it, worry about it. You can't go back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and make it different. So the only thing you can control, and this is really important, the only thing you can control is the way you view that situation. And if you're viewing it from a distance, one thing we know for certain, you have gone through it. You are victorious. I don't even like the word survivor. I think you're victorious. And for me, that's why I do these videos, because for me, anybody that's come through that kind of abuse, to me, is victorious. They're not a victim. They're not a survivor. They are victorious, and they need to change the way they look at that. But when they're stuck in the inner child mode, it's very difficult, Alex, because the inner child really focuses on unfairness and injustice, and then sets up this protection and this safety net around them.
And David, you're talking about the vow and the blaming ourselves. This happened because I'm not good enough, because I'm not lovable, I'm not valuable enough, I'm a bad girl or I'm a bad boy. I know you work with a lot of clients who've suffered with this sort of abuse. Is there a part of them that's also saying, I kind of deserved it because I'm not good enough, I'm a bad person?
That's a good point, Alex, because remember I said the first domino effect. Well, once you say, there's something missing in me, I'm not good, then you start to run the dominoes. And I deserve it, or I don't deserve as anything good, because you're running the scenario that the world's against me, there's something wrong with me, I can't be successful. And you're almost building up this scenario that you're very concerned about being the best that you can be, because everything's going to fall down and you're going to go back and people will see you for what you are. I'm just working with a client now, and this is what she says. It's like a mask, and I don't want people to see who I really am. And I said, but you're an amazing person. But the inner child doesn't believe that. And that's what you've got to get to. You've got to get through those years of kind of sayings and teachings and lies that you've been running through your mind, and you've got to get through that to get to the core, and you've got to deconstruct all that, Alex. It's very difficult to do because you've been running this model for so long.
And David, I can see like what we're talking about here is like something much, much deeper and more profound than the original situation was. Why can't I let go of this traumatic event or, traumatic years of my childhood? What we're now talking about is not only the trauma of that event or those years, we're talking about the legacy and how it's profoundly affected your view of yourself, which then in turn profoundly affects how you interact with the world and other people in your adult life. So in your relationships, in your career, all manner of ways.
That's a great point, Alex. And it's hard to say the second one is worse than the first one, because the first one was horrific enough. But it's almost like you've created a double whammy. You had the first trauma, the injustice, the abuse, whatever it was, the unfairness. And then you built up this other kind of what the inner child believes. First of all, it is a kind of defensive or a protection. And sometimes, strangely enough, it becomes very comfortable and you get used to it, and it's very difficult to break. So you've created from that first thing, you've created another. It's like a cocoon around it, but it means you're stuck. It's like you're stuck in your own prison, because that thing happened, and actually, in time, you have come through it, but in your mind, you keep replaying it.
And David, I know there'll be a lot of people listening to this and saying, how this is not comfortable. How can you say it, this way of thinking, this story I'm telling myself, what I believe about what happened? It's incredibly painful. How can you say it's comfortable?
Well, that's what some of my clients will tell me. they would tell me it's easier to believe this, or it's more comfortable, it's my comfort blanket, I'm so used to it. As you know from my other videos, I call it familiar. And so this is the scenario the inner child thinks about. So if you can recognize this, just take a moment now with me and drop your shoulders and take a breath. So what the inner child is saying is, that was so bad, that was so traumatic, that was off the scale, that was like a tsunami. I never want that to happen to me again. So I never want to put myself in that position of risk. So I either stick with what I know, this overly protection, this overly safety, which I know keeps me in red light feelings, but I'm on high alert. I am on super high alert, looking for any possibility that anybody that might let me down, might lie to me, might say one thing and do something else. I'm very aware in relationships and people who show any attention to me. I'm very keen on CCJ, not being criticized, not being compared, not being judgmental. Now, although I understand, this is the inner child speaking, although I understand that this is not successful, in a perverse way, I'm used to it. Now, what you're offering me, David, is a new way, a different way. This is the known and unsuccessful. And to break away from that is the unknown. David, this could be even worse. This could be worse. And I've got a choice now between the unknown, which, yes, will get me away from this, but could be worse, or the known, which I've been doing now for so many years, and I'm so used to it. And so I'm sorry to say the inner child will stay with the known because it's familiar. And then my clients will say, it's comfort, it's easier. I hear this as all the time. And like you, I'm going, this can't be easier, else you wouldn't have found me out if it's easier. But what they're actually saying is, it's familiar. I'm used to it.
So we've talked about the old way, the familiar way, the way that's keeping the trauma alive in our mind, and meaning that we're re-experiencing all the red light painful emotional feelings. And then you mentioned the new way, that the inner child doesn't trust, thinks is going to be even more painful.
Yes.
So what is the new way? What are we thinking in the new way?
So the new way is to base yourself on understanding that you're not a victim. It's not per you. The world is not against you. That you're actually victorious. I believe you're amazing. I believe that any child that has come through a dysfunctional childhood, for me, is absolutely amazing. And as I said earlier, this is why I do these videos, because I too came through a dysfunctional childhood. And I want to show you that your childhood does not define you. Can I repeat that? Your childhood does not define you unless you want it to. Because the whole thing about it is your childhood. It is in the past. So if you're reliving it, you are doing that. I know this is very difficult for you to accept, but it goes back to the core of the teaching. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of them. Emotions are natural and normal. And of course, if you want to remember your childhood, it's natural to create a red light feeling. But that was how many years ago for you as you're watching this? How many years ago was that trauma? Why do you want to keep on reliving it and going over it? And this is why we show you the golden thread in these videos, because the golden thread is a way to get back down to your inner child. Your inner child is stuck. It's like, as I say, it's like down in a dark cellar, and it needs someone to go and sit with them and talk to them, because the inner child is still looking at that situation through their childlike lens. And we've got to widen the lens to allow them to expand their perception of the world. And the new way, as you asked me, is walking in their flow. is trusting themselves, is knowing that, yes, this new way is not perfect. We don't live in the magic kingdom. We don't live in utopia. Things will go wrong, but we've got to show you that you've always had that ability to deal with everything that comes your way. You are a coping master. You've coped with this negative looking at the world. So imagine when you open your view and start looking at the world from a balanced, calm, Wu Wei perspective, when you start trusting yourself, when you stop doubting yourself, when you know that anything that comes your way, you can deal with. And how do I know this? Because you always have done. What we're talking about is how do you deal with it with ease, with flow, in Wu Wei, in that sweet spot. And so this is the new way. To walk the new way, first of all, you've got to go back. You've got to reparent your child. You've got to be the mature part of you has got to do something to that immature inner child part of your mind that your parents or your guardians couldn't do. You have to save yourself. You're the only one that can do it. Yes, these type of videos can help you and can guide you, but you have to be the one to do it. And if you're looking at these videos, you're ready because you're already making these inquiries in our videos and other people's videos. You've got to be able to know that you've got the tools to go back to those situations and to show the child how to deal with unfairness and injustice, how they view it, that the world sometimes is unfair. Life doesn't always work out the way that they want them to. And if they can get through it, then my goodness, they can get through anything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that this speaking to our inner child and almost being truthful with the child. So not saying, oh, well, if we now open ourselves up to other people, if we don't overly protect ourselves, it doesn't mean that things aren't going to go wrong, that people won't let us down, that they won't disrespect us. And we may naturally experience some red light feelings because of that. But that this time round, we're more in control of our emotions and our emotional experiences, and that it's not our fault. It's where they're at or where the situation's at. Because I think all this time from the point of trauma, we blame ourselves for when people treat us badly, or we think, if we believe that we deserved it, it was our fault, we're worthless. We've got to have this, it feels like a massive conversation with the inner child, David.
Well, it's a conversation. That's why we call it reparenting. It's a conversation that, as you said earlier, your physical parents should have had with you. But as I said, sometimes it's the physical parents that are creating the problems. So it's now your responsibility. And if you don't do it, then no one can do it for you. But when you go back, when you follow our practice and go down the golden thread and be able to sit with your inner child, because what your inner child is wants somebody that they've always been craving for, someone who will listen to them. And this is part of what I find when I work with clients and we do the golden thread and we contact their inner child and we start talking. My God, the inner child starts talking, Alex. And it's like, because there's sometimes, as my clients will say, well, I've done the golden thread, I've watched your videos, but my inner child doesn't want to speak. And when I do the inner child with them, you can't shut the child up. He's chattering away, because what happens is the mature part of your mind tries to shut the inner child away, tries to lock it away, and thinks that it can lock the trauma away, thinks it can lock the bad memories away. But really what you're doing is you're trying to imprison your inner child. And what I'm saying is, no, let your inner child out. Let me be there and talk to him and answer his or her questions. Let me listen to it. Let me. And normally, when I've had the introductory session and maybe one more session with a client, I will say to them at the end of the session, can I just have a word with your child now? And I'll say, have I represented you correctly? Have we talked about everything that you wanted to talk about in this session? And you'll see the client will say, that feels so relaxing. That's like that, all that stuff has been built up in me over the years and over the years. And I thought it would be like letting go of a volcano and I'd be destroyed, but it's not. It's just this inner child wanting someone to talk to, someone to listen, someone to offer it another way to look at life, another way to look at things, and widening the perception. As I say in many videos, one of the things about the inner child, it sees life through a pinhole, sees life through the views of a 6, 7, 8-year-old child. It's not seeing life through a mature point of view. And that's why there's sometimes this tug of war between the mature person and the inner child person. The mature person treats the inner child person so badly. I've got to be honest. A lot of my clients will treat themselves. This is a terrible thing to say, Alex, but I'm going to say it. A lot of my clients treat themselves much worse than I've ever been treated. They're terrible with themselves. They almost abuse themselves. And that's what we've got to stop. And then when we can start to build up the trust, when we can start to build it on what I call Shen, and we've done many videos and meditations on Shen. Shen is what I call your spirituality, your instinct, your inner knowing. And that's built on truth, honesty, and integrity. And when you can build from that, then the inner child will readily respond and mature very quickly and to grow up with you. And then this is a wonderful passage of exploration. But the inner child doesn't know, is on now the new path. It's you and the inner child working together as a team, not fighting each other, pulling together. And you know, I've said this on many videos. This is how the Taoists teach it. If you think about two horses pulling a carriage, we want the two horses working in unity, not pulling against each other, because the carriage doesn't go anywhere. We want to bring the horses together. We want to understand each other. We want to listen to the inner child. We want to educate the child. We want to answer the child's question. And then you start moving together. And that's the new path. That's the new road.
Thank you, David. And I think a lot of people will be concerned about the prospect of embarking on this journey and allowing the inner child to speak for the first time, because I guess I'm thinking there will be an outpouring of feelings and emotions and pent up thoughts and confusions and resentments that they, as an adult, have been kind of suppressing. And would you say that kind of puts people off from beginning this work, releasing the inner child from the prison we've kind of been keeping it in?
I think you're absolutely right, because I believe not every emotional feeling, but the majority of the intense red light feelings comes from your inner child. And what they're trying to do is to get your attention. They're trying to kind of understand what's been going on and why they're in this position. So the adult part of you will see it like opening Pandora's box, as if you like, and I've got to keep this suppressed. I've got to keep this down. And really, I've been doing this for over 45 years now, Alex. And rather than it being a terrible event, it is an amazing event. It's spiritual, it's uplifting. And I've never yet had a client say to me, that was the worst thing I've done. And perhaps if my clients are watching now, they can put some comment. It's the best thing that they've ever done, because they're releasing now. And then, yes, there is some stuff there. There's some not very nice stuff there, but now we can calmly go and address it and deal with it from a mature, from a spiritual point of view, from the point of view of truth, honesty, and integrity, from a point of view of love, from a point of view, as you said in the opening, peace, calm, listening. And we've just published just recently a Shen meditation. So perhaps if you get the idea, listen to that Shen meditation where you can really ground yourself as in your truth, where when the inner child kicks off a little bit, which they will do, you can just hold them. I often say to my clients, and some of them will bring a photograph of themselves when they're at this age, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I often say, imagine you've got yourself sitting on your lap, and just give them a hug and just listen to them and answer their questions. That's the number one thing when I'm working with a client, is just to answer their question. It's just to be able to give them another point of view, widen their perception, to understand that it wasn't them. It wasn't them. There's nothing wrong with them. You don't get value. This is one of the number one things. I know we've done several videos on this. You don't get value from other people. You have intrinsic value. Value can't be taken away from you. Value can't be stolen in childhood. And so you have that value. And this work is to reconnect to that value. And I'll just say before I finish, please listen to this. Do not let your negative childhood define you. Don't. Your childhood does not define you. You can grow and you can be the amazing, wonderful person that you really are. And you can live and walk in Wu Wei and walk in your flow and reach your potential.
Thank you, David. And I will put links in the show notes to many of our inner child reparenting and communication teachings, so you can learn more about how to do this practice, and also links to teachings on the issue of forgiveness and letting go of kind of injustices that you are holding on to with other people from the past, because that's a big thing as well, isn't it, David, here with this kind of past trauma issue?
Well, there's a couple of big videos we did, because I don't believe in the word forgiveness, because as you know, forgiveness always means you place blame before you forgive them. You've gone into judgmental mode. So our teaching is acceptance. So you may want to have a look at those videos, because that's a different way of looking at things, that you can accept the situation and then you can move on, win that peace and that love, and you can be in your flow.
And the really important point there, David, is that by acceptance, we don't mean accepting that it was okay, it was right, it was appropriate, that other person, what they did was okay. Mm-hmm. It's finding that level of acceptance that what happened, and how can I best deal with it now?
That's right. How can I get through? How can I live it on? Do I want to put it to bed? Do I want to move on from it? Why am I just reliving it? Because that incident isn't reliving. You're reliving it in your mind, and that's what you'll have control over, your mind.
And that's so important, David. This thing about who's got control now, because. Mm-hmm. For all of your clients, for all of the listeners out there who've experienced this kind of childhood trauma, they didn't have control of the situation then. Absolutely. Of course not. But they do have control now in terms of the choice of how to deal with it and how to manage it and how to process it.
And that's why I think they're victorious. If you've had a dysfunctional childhood, you didn't have the ability, the knowledge, the wherewithal to deal with it then, but you still got through it. Now you can bring in your intellect, you can bring in your spirituality, you can bring in your truth, you can bring in your love. And it's for you to reparent that child. That child is looking desperately to be parented. That child is looking desperately to be loved, to be nourished, to be cared for. And that's your job. And some people call it self-love, and that's okay. I call it qiang, self-nourishing. The Chinese word is qiang. Self-nourishing, for you to nourish yourself. Don't look outside of yourself for that. You take full responsibility for that, and you be at peace with yourself, and you be in your flow. And that's really what I want for you.
Thank you, David. Well, I hope you have benefited from this teaching. If you have, please do let us know, and maybe share it with someone else who you think it may also help. David works every week one-to-one with clients all over the world on these sort of childhood trauma issues and inner child work. If you'd like to learn more about David's consultations, I will also put a link to our website in the show notes below. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week, and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.